Okay, so Netflix has a new docuseries called Mr. McMahon. If you're a wrestling fan, you probably heard of it. If you aren't, maybe you've heard of it. I don't know. But it's pretty good. I'm not a wrestling fan, admittedly, but I was interested to watch it because I grew up with wrestling a little bit. Not really as a fan, just more it was on TV and I would catch it. But I'm going to read this article here. This is the Washington Post, so expect a bit dumpster fiery thing. But it's arts and entertainment, so they do okay. They're not trying to politically lean you one way or the other. Let's see what they have to say here. What we learned from the Mr. McMahon Netflix documentary, which I just watched, by the way. I binge watched it yesterday from start to finish, so I'm fairly fresh on it. Okay, so we may never know who Vince McMahon really is. No one really knows me, McMahon, the professional wrestling mogul and former boss of the WWE, says in the first episode of the 6-part Netflix series Mr. McMahon, which was released on Netflix on Wednesday. I wish I could tell you the real stories, he says. I don't want to tell you these stories. I don't want anybody to really know me. The docuseries from filmmaker Chris Smith, who made Tiger King, and executive producer Bill Simmons, who did 30 for 30, interviewed dozens of former and current WWE employees about McMahon and his legacy. It explores who McMahon was on screen, the villainous boss who ruled with an iron fist, and who he was behind the scenes, a competitive promoter who has faced multiple lawsuits. The series comes after McMahon in January resigned as executive chairperson and from the board of World Wrestling Entertainment's parent company, TKO, amid I'm not supposed to say that word, but abuse allegations. He has denied all wrongdoing. So, I can see already from the way this article is going a little bit, it's, I don't know, they're kind of villainizing him right away, but I'll continue to read a little bit and then I'm going to kind of get into my review of this from somebody who just watched it and somebody, again, who's not really not a wrestling fan. So, but I did know a little bit about it growing up. So McMahon denounced the documentary days before its debut, slamming the producers and the editing for leaning into their own narrative rather than telling both sides of the story. A lot has been misrepresented or left out entirely in an effort to leave viewers intentionally confused, McMahon said in a statement posted Monday on X, which is kind of funny that he says that because, he's the showman, right? He's the guy who's doing that all the time, who's goofing with people and, lying and doing all this shit to make soap opera type stories in the WWE, right? So it's kind of funny that it's coming back on him a little bit. Producers use typical editing tricks with out-of-context footage and dated sound bites, etc., to distort the viewer's perception and support a deceptive narrative. Representatives for WWE and McMahon did not immediately respond to requests for comment. So here's one of the things I'm going to read. They do 7 takeaways here. I'm not going to get into them all, but this one here, it's pretty poignant on this. It's a history of pro wrestling. Many of the details shared throughout the documentary aren't new for wrestling fans. In many ways, the depictions of WWE's rise through the 80s and 90s under the guidance of McMahon serve as a history lesson for those who have never watched the not-quite sport. The 6 hours will easily catch viewers up on some of wrestling's biggest moments, including the careers of John Cena, Hulk Hogan, Stone Cold Steve Austin, and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. It's also a deep dive into the Mr. McMahon persona seen on television, who was often pompous, egotistical, and tyrannical in his decision-making. So basically, it takes you through the history. It starts obviously in the 80s when wrestling started to it was before the 80s that it started, but really the WWF at that time was the 80s. It started in the 80s essentially with like Hulk Hogan and these guys, right? And then it shows you the stories of what happened with these guys like Hulk Hogan leaving the WWF at that time, and the rise of other stars, the reason why they left, and all this kind of thing. And then the WCW building up and becoming the premier wrestling outlet, I guess you'd say, for a little while. Actually, I think it was 83 weeks. Yeah. Well, yeah, no, it was 83 weeks that the WCW beat the WWF at that time. I keep saying that time because they were the WWF for a while until they got sued by the World Wildlife Foundation, which still took WWF, and that's why they had to change to the WWE, which is World Wrestling Entertainment. But so back in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, they were the WWF. Anyways, so it was, you know, it shows that, it shows what happened and how the WCW kind of stepped in and, you know, stole all their talent, and, you know, some of the different controversies that may have happened with some of the different, you know, whatever you want to call them, the actors, whatever, wrestlers that were in the WWE, guys like Bret Hart. What happened with him? What happened with Owen Hart? So it's really it's a really good docuseries. They don't, this article kind of says that they lean a little bit into making Vince McMahon a bad guy. I didn't see that in the art or in the series. I thought they did a pretty good job of just sort of showing who he was. They kind of went both ways because a lot of people would say really good things about him, and then they showed how, you know, like how he was just business focused. Honestly, I don't want to give too much away of it. Obviously, if you go watch it yourself, it's a docuseries, so realistically, it's not like, you know, it's gonna be a bunch of cliffhangers or anything like that. But you should watch it. I highly recommend it. I think it's really good. It was really well done. Obviously, if you watch The Tiger King and 30 for 30, you know that they're well produced documentaries. So this is no different. It's really well produced. This all is ahead of obviously some of the allegations that he has for some misconduct, for some, you know, some sex misconduct, and the like. But, you know, it's, I don't know if he's a good guy, bad guy. All I know is he was good for business. He was good for the WWF, WWE now, and he makes no real apologies for it. I'm not going to give this away, but there's a pretty funny sort of storyline. If you know wrestling, you might know what I'm talking about. But there's a funny storyline with his wife and his mistress that they go into, and that it's pretty funny. So it goes to show you that basically the whole thing was a show. They all knew it was a show. The whole family was involved in the show. The wrestlers were involved in the show, and, you know, they built a really big, good business. And, you know, I don't think necessarily Vince McMahon, the businessman, was a bad dude. Whether he was a bad dude outside of that, oh, we'll have to see. But definitely give this a high review. You should watch it. Let me know what you think in the comments. Watch it, come back, we can discuss.